Hi, guys, it's Michelle Carpenter, and we're here to have another conversation with the delightful Stephen Lewis. We both reside in Nelson currently, and who knows what's going to come up today. I'm going to hand it over to Stephen, and let's see where we go with our beautiful conversations. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Michelle. Lovely to see you as always. I love that thing over your shoulder that says family. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I just noticed it. I had a moment of inspiration in the gym this morning, and the word that came into my mind when I asked was authenticity. And I know I've spoken of this before, and I will speak of it again. I was trying to work out that there are a couple of stories I want to share, because that's all I have to share is my life journey. And the wisdom, I hope, if it touches people, will come from the journey, not from me analysing it and eloquently writing it down, but rather just speaking my truth. And there were a couple of things that came to me, and I've made a point of not rehearsing them, of not having the conversation with myself about them, because then it becomes contrived. And if people are watching, then I hope they will share it and it will touch them. And I got to do a workout as well, so all is good with them. The first
multitasking,
story,
absolutely multitasking.
I know you think I was a girl, wouldn't you?
Wonderful. So what does authentic or being authentic mean to you?
It is knowing in the moment that you are living your truth. And I spent 35 years of my life not living my truth. I was controlled by a very controlling father who really contrived more than anything to make me fail. And that I would hate to think he actually understood it as that, but that was the truth of it, was that my failure consolidated his position as the leading male in the family, a mother and two daughters who did everything he wanted, and then me. And I struggled terribly. Yet, ironically, as soon as I was away from him, I would blossom. But when I was with him, or when his control over me was greater, then I couldn't, because that was not his end game. And I don't think he understood this. Generations and the forces that influence them. And I've talked about this before, he being a solipsist, a man who, whatever it was he thought or said was true because he thought or said it. And compared it to Donald Trump in the very first interview we did. And I still smile at that today.
Yes.
A lot of weeks later, and it still titillates me, that comparison. And there's a particular episode of my life, there are lots, but there was a particular episode of my life which was so conflicted in so many ways, yet had that little expression I love, a happy ending. And it had a happy ending. And I wanted to share it with people, whoever, as many or as few listen to this. Just because I realized that these are the moments, not the ones where you win hands down, but the ones where you survive perhaps with your dignity and with growth, even if they're not the most comfortable, that when you look back on your life, you realize they are the ones that shape your life. Not the easy ones, not the ones where you do the thing you do well, even better than well, and everyone plaudits you and says how clever and wonderful you are. Ones where you actually come out and you retain your dignity. And the story I was going to tell was about an experience I had, and I'll give some background because we're not in any rush today. I'll just tell a story. There was a point in the early 80s when I had been working in a business which originally had been owned by my father. And I've told this story, and I was invited to come into the business when a huge American corporation took it over. I'd met them through family dinners and things, but I was a stockbroker at the time, and a man approached me, a lovely fellow he was as well, and said, would I consider going into the business? And I said, not if I was going to have to work directly with my father. And he said, we need you here. We need a second generation of management. He's not going to have anyone. But he now works for a corporation, whether he likes it or not, and he has to be able to demonstrate that if anything was to happen to him, there would be somebody who could come in and manage the business. And the timing was perfect. The city had just crashed again, not directly because of me, but ironically, indirectly it was. I was involved with one of those fly-by-night firms who were very flashy, made huge amounts of money, and then when they crashed, there was an enormous explosion. And that had happened in the previous year. move the clock forward, oh gosh, 10 years, and I built a large division of this company, but it could not be profitable. It never was going to be profitable. And when at the very beginning I put it to them that I couldn't see big enough margins, they said, we're looking for a share of that part of the industry. And so you do what it is you need to do to give us that share of the industry. And 12 years later, 10 years later, they decided to sell it, ironically, to the people I'd taken it from in the main.
Wow.
Very nice. And it was proposed that I might go to Harvard and do a particular course that they ran there, which would prepare me to move across to perhaps something bigger, perhaps transatlantic. I don't know. I didn't know what it was, but it resonated for me, although there was one aspect of it that I didn't particularly enjoy the prospect of, and that was studying. I've mentioned before, and we've talked about this, that we share a gift and a failing. We're both autodidacts. I have enormous problems learning from the written word, learning from anything other than my own life experience, and that's proven to be my saving grace in the end. But I applied to do this course, and they accepted me, and I turned up in September of 1982, and I was the youngest person out of 126. I had the biggest job title because I'd written my own. I had the biggest job title of anyone. To give a context, it was for people who had previously been highly specialized in their gifts and skills, working inside corporations, but doing very specialist functions. And it was the time in those corporations for these particular people to be moved up. So they were managing others doing that. And in order to do that, many of them had very, very specialized training, but what they weren't trained in was large-scale business management. And nor was I, for that matter. The fact that I ran a business didn't mean I knew what I was doing. And to give it context, the guy in one room next to me was part of the team that put the man on the moon.
Wow.
He worked for NASA, lovely fella, and he was a scientist, and he was part of that group in that room on that day when, he said, one step for mankind, one giant leap for mankind.
Wow.
And in the room nodding his head when that was said. Lots of specialist people, not all putting people on the moon, some on Mars, but all sorts of highly trained people, and me faking it and knowing I was faking it. And the way I describe it was that on the very first day of the course, as we were about to start, this incredibly intense 13-week experience where they own you body and soul for 13 weeks. You got half a day off a week, Sunday afternoon, but you still had 8 hours of preparation to do for the next day. And the way I describe it for me was that just as they were about to set off on this marathon, I looked down and realized, figuratively, one of my shoelaces was undone. So I bent down and tied my shoelace and thought, well, I'll tie the other one as well. And as I was doing that, the gun went off. There was this huge explosion of energy as all these people ran off. And by the time I'd stood up after tying my shoelace, they disappeared round the corner. Wow. This is figuratively, but it was the truth. These were such clever people, so excited to be there and being force-fed the Harvard MBA course in 13 weeks.
Wow.
You weren't going to be tested on it. You were going to be force-fed huge amounts of information.
Sure.
Over very, very long days from 6 in.the morning till midnight.
Sure.
And I looked up and they'd gone. There was nobody there. And I sort of wandered around a little bit and walked off thinking I'll save my energy now to see where they'd gone. And I never did catch up with them. And the extraordinary experience was that for a couple of weeks I was in a panic, praying that I wouldn't be called out in the lecture rooms. It was split into two groups. And one thing was you did one set of work one morning and the other group did it in the afternoon and you switched over. I was lost. I was just completely lost and terrified that I was going to be found out. at the end of the second week, on a Saturday evening, and I may have mentioned this, I don't know, it doesn't matter, it's a story. On the Saturday evening, I went into the CAN. They were called CAN groups, or living groups, because the CAN in America is the toilet and the bathroom. And the toilet and bathroom were in the middle of the living area. I don't mean open, you had to go through a door. They were called CAN groups. And I went into the CAN, and the guy on the other side of me, not the NASA guy, but another guy that I was living and working with and doing all this stuff, he was having a nervous breakdown. And if you've seen a nervous breakdown, then it's terrifying. You know, somebody in that mental state is trying to do things that physically you're not able to. He was literally trying to climb the wall to get out in an enclosed bathroom. He had just lost it. It was too much for him. In the end, about 10% of the people didn't complete the course, as I recall.
Sure.
From emotional issues around the extraordinary pressure that was placed upon them. I was the person there, so I called an ambulance, and they came and they took him away, and everyone was highly traumatized by this, as you can imagine. Under enormous pressure anyway. The next day, it was a Sunday, and I remember I was sitting outside on the grass. It was September, still nice in Boston, Massachusetts. Cambridge, actually, they call it Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was doing some preparation, and I got called into our living group. And there was a man sitting at the head of the table, and very stern looking, very serious looking. And the 8 of us, because we were 9, but one of us had disappeared, he explained to us what had happened to this guy, that he'd had a nervous breakdown, that he'd gone to hospital, that the prognosis was that he would not be returning. And this was very heavy, and people were in a deep state of shock. These were people normally in control of their lives, and there they were back at school, if you will, and having the experience of losing somebody. Something that was potentially there for any one of us. I listened to this for about 10 minutes, and I couldn't help myself. I made a wisecrack. And the room broke up. The impact of this one moment of levity in something so heavy, perfect.
Do you remember what you said? Can you remember what you said?
No, I can't. I just know that they thought it was funny. I said something that was completely inappropriate, but at the same time it wasn't, because you're in such a desperate place. The room broke up, including the fellow at the head of the table. And people started to look to me to change the energy of the room. And several times, I don't mean every minute or two, but several times over the next half hour, when it felt appropriate to me, I lightened the load. I said something funny or witty or clever, or just being the smart ass that we now know I am. Yes. And there was an affection that came towards me from the room and from the man at the top table. What I didn't know was that he was the dean of the course.
Oh, wow.
And there I was, the single most inadequate person in their environment. But I was holding the group together. Go forward 13 weeks. I'll just tell one little aside. I always have an aside to tell. This room next to me was vacant. And one evening, after 3 or 4 days, I heard a noise inside it. And I knocked on the door to see who had moved into this room. There was a much younger guy. Probably, I was 32. He was probably, and the youngest, he was in his late 20s. And as he opened the door, I sniffed something, and I knew instantly what it was. And he was sort of rather cautious when he opened the door, and I introduced myself, and I said, "You've got a spliff going in there, haven't you? The joint." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you want to share it?" He was an associate professor, the youngest one ever appointed, and they had invited him to take the spare place on our course, and to do that course as well as teaching his own work. And every night about 11 o'clock, one of us would go into the other's room and the experience, because that's what we would seriously have been the only 2 people smoking a joint in Harvard.
Wow.
And what was extraordinary was a lot of things fell into place with me once I took the pressure off myself and just returned to being me, which is what this is all about.
And you finished the entire course?
But not only did I finish the course,
Wow.
but on the last night, I went to what they call the gala dinner. We call it gala, the big night where they give a presentation. Everyone gets a certificate, whether they learned anything or not, apparently. Everyone gets a certificate, and then there is this gala dinner. And a few times over the next 13 weeks, I had moments with the dean. To my utter astonishment, when I looked at the table plan, I wasn't with my class.
Wow.
I wasn't with my group.
Mm-hmm.
I searched around like crazy, thinking they've seen through me and I'm not allowed to come. And I'd been put on the top table between the dean and his wife.
Gosh.
And what he said to me was, I know that you have felt inappropriate here, that you haven't felt as if this is where you're meant to be. And what you've taught me is, yes, you are. And what we need is more people like you, more people who have perhaps learned business by the seat of their pants and don't have the academic qualifications to be here, but have the other skills and gifts.
Hmm.
And at the end of 13 weeks, and I'm almost in tears telling the story, I was recognized for the truth of who I was, rather than for just being the same as 120, 110, however many were left, of these very clever, very specialized brains.
Amazing.
And the dean and his wife had a little crush on me as well, which is very sweet. Because once again, I wasn't like all the other academics. You know, my sphincter was somewhat more relaxed and I was able to make them laugh. And it was so sweet. And again, because I have these little stories to tell, what was so ironic was I got back to England and it was Christmas time. That was a 13-week fall course as it was. And my father was away. When I got back, when he got back, and I'd also had a holiday, he avoided me for a couple of days and he called me into his office and he said, I've got good news and bad news. He said, the good news is I've bought the business back from the American corporation. I don't work for them anymore. Sure. And as a result of that, I don't have to employ you anymore. You're fired.
Was that good news to you?
Well, in the moment that he told me, it was somewhat confusing.
Yes.
In the end, it was the making, as these things always are. And ironically, I got a payout that he did not want to pay me because he had no reason to fire me other than his own vanity. But or whatever it was, but he needed me not to be there.
Wow.
And
because you were a threat to him still?
Yes,
at this
I
age?
was always a threat to him. I was a threat to him from the day I was born.
Sure.
And you know, and there isn't a person who will listen to this who won't have a circumstance in their life. It doesn't have to be that responsible for, but it has shaped their life, and it has either made them a hero or a villain, or both. And you know, I got my share of both. But the ultimate irony was that I never worked again. That I left. It took 3 months of very heavy negotiation to get a deal out of my father because he didn't want to give it to me, and I wasn't going to leave until I got it. And the irony was that I went into a sort of wilderness, which involves the second story I'm going to tell. 3 years later, when I was ready, learned that I had a healing gift. I never actually worked again. After going to Harvard. How ironic is that?
That is very ironic. I mean, people are going to be blown. Their minds are going to be blown. The fact that you even got into Harvard, that you did what you did. I mean, that's plausible and just amazing.
I'm not sure if it's plausible, but it's applausible.
I actually think I said it like that because I thought plausible. And I'm like, no, I think it's actually plausible, Michelle. But I think I said plausible. So let's give you an applause.
Yeah, I know. But and again, it's not about I did well or I did badly or anything. It was about the fact that there were points on my journey, there are points on everyone's journey where you have the opportunity just to be the truth of who you are. And if you are that person, others will recognize it in you and will respond to it. I was the sort of chairman of my group, because that was my skill. My skill was to make people feel better with themselves, to encourage them to do my work because I couldn't do it, and to work as a team and to be enthusiastic to enjoy their lives together. And I was the odd one out. There was only one of me in the whole course. And as I say, what was so flattering was that the dean eventually said to me, we're going to work to have more people like you.
Amazing.
But that's true for everyone listening to this. It's when you find the authentic you, and it's not presented to you initially. You have to go through a very long and complex journey, and I'm not there, but I'm an awful lot closer to it than I ever was. And you live the authentic you, the world will come to your door. The universe will provide for you. You will be able to find a level of happiness that you will allow yourself, because in the end, it's down to the peace that you make with yourself. And that's what that did for me. And how ironic that I'd never worked again. And I had completed, and I got a payout that my father did not want to give me. And all of these different things happened. And interesting, this is the other, or one of the other stories I wanted to share. And I hope you see the value in what it is I'm saying to you, that it's not about this is how you do that and that's how you do that. It's that if you trust yourself, if you've done some work on yourself, to begin the journey to heal the damage that we all inherit.
Yes.
That there are opportunities to become the more.
Yes.
And somebody mentioned this to me a couple of days ago about the more. They were very touched by the word the more, or the two words, the more. And it caused me to stand back and think about it. And I got it's this wonderful sensation that there is actually more. That who you think you are, who you're educated, who your society tells you you're supposed to be, is not all that there is. And this was a wonderful example of it, that I found my more, which was just me, but in a particular environment in which I was deeply uncomfortable. I grew into the preparation for what ultimately would be my authentic life journey as a healer. And you do not put the words Harvard and healer. Well, you do, because they go to start with an H, but
Yes.
you don't put them very close to each other. But the truth is that was a major critical stepping stone for me in trusting myself. I could have an experience like that and survive it, not just survive it. And I have friends to this day from, just go up to 40 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible.
And we share, smart ass emails and funny things. And it's very touching.
It's incredible. Wow. Sure. Amazing story. So how would you, to those, or for those who are listening, how would you suggest, besides the work, learning to be our authentic selves, becoming more self-aware, however we look at it, learning to speak our truth, what would be a starting point for somebody that's listening to this and going, oh, okay, Stephen, so is it or would you say it's your higher self, or the more that got you there, or what is it? Is it that gut feeling inside of you? Because it sounds to me like you were pushed into Harvard unwillingly, but yet you went with it. Something inside of you decided that you were going to go with it, whatever that may be. Do you know what that was 40 years ago?
It was on my journey. It was simply on my journey. And you used a word there, and fun enough, it's a word that particularly has a resonance, albeit negative for me, and that is the gut feeling. The gut is where our emotions sit. Our emotions are not our truth. They are our reactions to who it was we were initially told to be in life, and how that person reacts to events in our life. For me, it's exactly the opposite of that. It's not my gut reaction. It's when I've heard my gut reaction, and the one great gift of my gut reaction is I know I can't trust it. I know that when the little boy knee jerks, that is a major warning for me not to trust how I'm going to feel over the next short period about whatever it is that's gone on. And I do this daily. I do it several times a day, where I check myself, because I know there is a gift in what just happened. It was not my truth. The gift was that it wasn't my truth. And I got to react, because that's how the human beings work. We don't respond, we react in the first instance. We knee-jerk.
Knee-jerk, yes.
And that's a great gift, because it shows where our fear lies. It shows where what the little boy, the little girl wants to hear or is afraid of hearing. You talk about flight or fight or whatever, all those things.
Mhm.
And in a sense, this is just my version of that. I am acutely aware of myself. Because of years and years and years of practice, this does not come overnight and it don't come easy.
No.
I'm acutely aware of my knee jerks. A buzzer goes off very clearly for me, and I am not allowed to accept whatever that reaction was as my truth. I don't have to go to it in that moment. If I'm upset or angry or frustrated or tired or whatever, I'll know to walk away from it, to empower it as little as I'm able to. But absolutely to go back and revisit it, because that's where the gift of the experience comes. And I have them all the time. Everyone does. Moments of negativity, moments of feeling inadequate, all sorts of moments that are gifts on the journey, if you know how to unwrap them. If you simply hold the package in your hand and say, oh, how lucky am I? All you get is a package. You don't know what's inside it. And if you are committed to being I was going to say a better you, but that's arrogant, to being a happier you. The only place you will find happiness is in your truth, authentic.
For sure.
That is my journey. And I talk about this, we've talked about it over the conversations we've had, that I consider myself hugely blessed, but I also know that I still can't trust myself, that I will have my bad moments as well as my good moments, that there will be times of confusion where I will know, as at the moment, Mercury is retrograde. You and I have discussed this. Whenever people listen to this, it may or may not be in retrograde, but when Mercury is in retrograde, you cannot trust yourself and you cannot trust what's put in front of you, not because it's set up for you to fail, but because there is a force 3 times a year for 3 weeks each time, where you mishear, you misinterpret, you misunderstand. It's a time for finishing things, but not for starting things. And I'm sure I've mentioned this in the past. I phoned my fairy godmother from Taos, New Mexico, a rancher's daughter, and I said, Patria, what the hell's going on? She said, darling, Mercury's in retrograde. And I knew the truth, and that stayed with me all of my life since then.
Yes.
When Mercury is retrograde, as it is now, that I will tell you, I'll meet you in the bar at 3, and you'll say, I was in the church at 4, where were you? And we'll both swear on a stack of Bibles, I was going to say. But what we believed was true was what we'd arranged. And it helps enormously just to know that this is a moment in time when you cannot trust yourself completely, because you will be convinced. Last week, I looked at the beginning of it at my diary, and I had all these crossings out, all these arrangements I'd made that got cancelled or changed or whatever. And I thought, that's perfect. That's exactly what Mercury in retrograde is.
I found that over the weekend, I've got a booking system on my website, and I've had clients double book on the same time, and I'm busy trying to sort that all out this morning. How the heck is this happening? 3 clients at the same time. Like, it's, just can't fathom it out. So
smart ass, and Lewis explained it. It's just that. It's Mercury in retrograde. And whilst there are lots of planetary forces at play in our lives all the time, this is one that resonated very strongly. I don't want to build my life around fear, but I do about the ability to make my life, under whatever circumstances they are, work for me as best it might. It's like now, here we are, we're in beginning of October, we're in New Zealand, the world's in complete disarray. There is no certainty. We are trying to stop COVID in its tracks, and everyone else is trying to accommodate COVID and create a world in which COVID still exists. And I'm not saying we're right or wrong, but it can be confusing when the nation you're inside is struggling with its agenda, when the rest of the world is struggling with a slightly different agenda. And who knows what's going to be. And the key, when and if you're able to, and I'm better able to than most because of my circumstances, is just live in the moment. Just hold on to the moment and allow the moment to be. And I'll let that take me on to the other story I wanted to share. I have in my life an extraordinary woman. The story goes that I went to my favorite club in London with a friend, and there was this banquet, this lovely round half table with all these blokes sitting at it, and he walked out because he knew them all. I didn't. I was standing just behind him, and he was talking to them, and suddenly from nowhere, this gorgeous little blonde, whom I couldn't even see, poked out from between two large men, looked me square in the eye and said, "You're gorgeous. Why have I never met you before?" Yeah, that's going to capture your attention. And she excused herself, left 5 men plus my mate sort of sitting or standing there. And so the story began. This was...
How did you respond? Just for the ladies out there, how did you respond when this gorgeous blonde said that to you?
I was blown away. I was normally in control at that stage. I'm never speechless.
No, exactly.
But no, what happened was that it took me outside of my comfort zone. What I'd learned in the previous 7 months, maybe, of being single, really for the first time in my adult life, was what my strengths were, how to manage them, how to deal with people, how to make people feel comfortable. If I was attracted to a girl, this was the early 80s. You know, people were playing, and I got to play at almost the best time imaginable. And this took away my center of gravity. I was slightly out of balance with myself. We went and we chatted. We had a drink, and she was like Goldie Hawn. For those who wow. Maybe don't know, she was small, blonde, and gorgeous, and gave the appearance of being a little daffy and a little light-brained, when actually that was her tool. That was how she played people, by playing up to something that all men love, which is a slightly ditzy, blonde, pretty, and yeah, full of energy and personality. And that's who she was. She was pretty and she was gorgeous, and no man was going to say no to this girl, because, you know, like with Goldie Hawn, you know, she just stands there and is gorgeous, and you just say yes to her. Whereas a more intellectual, a brighter woman, you'll be challenged and challenging. With this girl, there was no challenge. There never was common ground between us. From who each of us was, the common ground was where we went to when we weren't being ourselves. She became a clearer, more articulate thinker, a broader thinking person, and I became a little sillier and a little more joyful. And we went out for probably a year. Not all the time. We went out 3 nights a week. She stayed over 3 nights a week, and I got to play for 4 nights a week. It was a very great. But I absolutely adored her, and she me. We never had a bad word, nothing. And what was so curious was, after about a year, she came to my apartment one evening, and I knew something was about to happen, that her energy was very different, who she was. And she came in, and almost without touching me or hugging me or doing the things, she said, all my family and friends want to know what's going to happen between us. Wow. I'd been single for 18 months, and I was in no sense settled or ready to start to plan what was going to happen in my life. And I just had a 7-year marriage, which was extraordinarily uncomfortable for me. And she was a good girl. She was a lovely girl, but it wasn't ultimately meant to be my career. And I certainly wasn't ready. I hadn't grown into anything like the man that I might have become at that stage. And I was still dealing with all the issues of my childhood with my dad and other things, but primarily that I hadn't found peace with myself. And I said to her, I love you. I told you I love you, but I don't know when, and I don't know if. Moment. So you have to find whether you can continue to see me, and I would love for us to stay in relationship with each other, or if that's not acceptable to you because of the pressure. And we separated for a couple of months, and the same thing happened maybe 4 times over the next 5 years. Wow. There was a phone call or a knock on the door, or I was in a pub or a bar or something, and there she was, and instantly we were back together again. And it was all forgotten, and that wasn't the issue. And she just wanted to be with me, and I wanted to be with her. And she wasn't asking me if I was going to marry her, and I wasn't telling her I didn't know. And this went on for some period, including the time I was at Harvard, interestingly. And she actually came to Harvard, this little ditzy blonde, and all the guys there. And out of 126 people, and this will give you an idea of context of the time, there were 4 women and 122 men, and they were lucky to be there. No. fact, the making of my group was that we were one of only 4 out of whatever it was, 13 groups or whatever, that had a woman in our group. And it so improved the energy of the group to have a woman and for people to not just respect her, but to absorb her energy into the being of the whole group. That worked wonderfully well. So Judy came and she had the experience of Harvard, and we went out and I showed her that little world for a few days. And this, when I got back, no job anymore because of what I've just explained. And this repeated itself several times. And then eventually there was a moment where it could not move forward anymore, where she was absolutely entitled to ask the question. And I had no answer to give her other than the same one I'd always done. And I said, no, I still do not feel that this is where I want to go in the future in my life, but I can't imagine anywhere better than where I am in the present in my life.
Meaning you didn't want to get married to her? Is that what you mean?
No, meaning I could not foresee myself married from where I was standing in my life in that moment. There were lots of other things I still needed to do. And we separated, and I used that moment to separate myself wholly from her. And I went around the world. I was able to do this. I took 6 months and traveled the world. I visited lots of friends that I'd made around the world, had a wonderful time, screwed myself senseless. It was wonderful.
Some would call that loss, some would call that grieving, some would call that whatever. I don't know.
I lost and grieving. I screwed myself. Try and heal loss.
Numbing the pain.
It was just great. It was, I discovered that, I was sort of at the perfect age and stage of my life to have that experience. And eventually I got back to England, and I'd had no contact with her at all. And I'd been back a couple of weeks, and there was a knock on my door, and I opened the door and she was standing there, and she said, I am never going to let you go.
Wow.
And I got it. But with absolute clarity. I'd had 6 months. I can't say I didn't miss her, but I also knew that I would have a life without her, and it would be a life that would hopefully grow me into the more that I aspired to allow myself to become. And I realized in that one moment that was the truth, that I needed to complete this. Whatever the outcome was, I needed to complete this. And six weeks later, we were married.
Gosh.
And 13 weeks later, we separated forever.
Wow.
Because the moment we were married, she realized why I had said what I had said. That seeing somebody, we never lived together, seeing somebody overnight, only loving them, only being funny and entertaining and romantic and all the things that we were able to be. Once we were living together, and she had never left her parents' home ever.
Wow.
Once we were living together, the reality of the limits, we talked about perhaps going to business together. She was in the fashion business, enormously talented. A little aside on that, about 6 months after we'd started going out, I said to her, I'm going to ask you to do something tomorrow, and you're not going to want to do it, but if you will trust me, it will have a happy ending. I said, I want you to go into work tomorrow, and I want you to go and see your 2 bosses first thing, and I want you to say the following to them. I'm going to say something to you now, and I don't want you to answer me now. I want you to answer me at the end of the day. I would like you, please, to double my wages, and I'd like you, please, to buy me a car. If you're able to do that, then I will stay with you and happily continue with what I do. And if you're not able to, then I'm going to leave. She turned around, she walked out. And when she came home to me that night, she said, I just got my wages doubled and I've got a car coming.
Wow.
2 Rolls-Royce driving, very clever men had a ditzy little girl who made their business work. Not only did she design all of their ranges, but she then went to the fairs and sold them. Anyone who came into their building didn't want to deal with them. They sat in the back office with their Rolls Royces parked outside and counted the money.
Wow.
And it suited her image of herself to be the waif, to not have a lot of money and to have to sit on the tube every night and go home and to see herself as less.
Yes.
That was her upbringing, not in a violent way, not in a horror, but that was the truth of it, and she played it wonderfully. And that was a beautiful moment. And for anyone listening, if you when you truly value yourself honestly, others value you equally. And she doubled her wages and got a car.
Incredible, eh?
Because they could not afford to not have her there.
Of course.
She was the heart of the business.
So is this so it's your second wife? But
yeah.
Okay, so it lasted for 13 weeks.
13 weeks. What happened halfway through was that she was becoming ill, as she would do from the pressure. It wasn't that we were fighting all the time. It was that she could now clearly see that the forward journey was not going to be smooth, that there were no doors opening for us. There wasn't a way forward in the journey. And she was a smoker, and she also had respiratory issues, and she went to see a hypnotist to stop her from smoking. And I don't know what happened, but when she returned home that night, she was a different person. I don't think she herself knew what had happened. She didn't say anything for 24 hours. And then, and this is 6 weeks into what turned out to be a 13-week marriage, and then she started to scream.
Like literally scream at you? Or
she would come home from work to scream at me.
Okay.
She effectively had a nervous breakdown, not without justification, but there would have been a lot of deeper issues as well that came up with this.
Of course.
And eventually, 7 weeks later, she came home during the day to scream at me again, and I got it. There was nothing I could do about it. And when she'd finished screaming, I led her to the door very gently. I opened the door and I said, "I will not be here tomorrow. Come and collect your clothes." And that was the end of our marriage. And for a couple of years, we didn't talk. And then I think we bumped into each other somewhere. So we're now talking the sort of mid-80s. Just then, it was actually very relevantly, it was only about 2 months later that I learned I had my healing gift. So that needed to complete in order for me to be ready for my authentic life.
Yes.
And I did a workshop just 2 months later, learned I had a healing gift, and my whole life changed. We are now 35 years later. There is not a week when we don't speak to each other at least once, and sometimes more than that. I am the first person she will come to with an issue, and she for me. And we utterly adore each other. She never remarried. She did have a child, not with somebody by mistake, but there are no mistakes. So she has a son, completely grown up now. And we both got to have our lives, and we got to remain in each other's lives.
And did she, after that experience of you having to go your separate ways, I think it's such an important part of our conversation today to mention to people that once she went to hypnotherapy and she came back and you said there was just something different. And I think it's such an important place to say that, you know what, it doesn't mean that it's a good or bad thing. It was clearly a time in her life, in my assumption of the work that I do, that there was old stuff that was coming up, and you were the one that she projected it onto. I'm assuming based on what you've said, but that's where the work comes into it, like what we were saying earlier on. You know what I mean? It's that we'll go to I've seen it so often. I don't know if you've seen it on your healing journey, but a lot of times people go for a session here or a session there, and before you know it, they've been to 10 different people searching for the thing that's going to make them feel better or help them. But the reality is that I feel that sometimes this opens up a lot, and that's what it sounds like with what you're describing, that specific session opened up a lot for her. So do you know if she continued on that journey of healing herself?
I don't, because I haven't thought about it in terms of how you're asking me it. Clearly her journey would have shifted dramatically from what she expected it to be in that moment. I can't answer that, because the sweetness of our relationship together is as it was before the marriage issue came up. It was just in the joy of two souls being together. The other issues weren't mine to resolve for her, or mine for her to resolve for me. And I'm not saying that's true of all relationships, but we didn't marry, we didn't have children. Well, we did marry, we didn't have children together. We didn't pursue that journey. And the fact that we returned to that place of deep comfort with each other a couple of years later, and obviously had to grow back into it, and that 35 years later, we're still having the same conversations. We're still able to adore the moment one of us knows that it's the other one on the phone, that we will go to that place of joy and delight and no pressure. And if you are married to somebody and you're making a life with them and you're taking on enormous responsibilities, then, and I've been watching this recently, actually, then you don't get to have your authentic journey. You get to share a journey with somebody else. And sometimes you will go into sacrifice for that person, or you will refuse to go into sacrifice for that person. A relationship that starts off with two people deeply in love with each other becomes conflicted, because they each have needs that the other one on their journey does not want to resolve, because it doesn't help them on their journey, and that's a direct conflict. You know, there is no easy answer to that. And I watch people who've been together for a very long time, and sometimes I am joyed by the beauty of the depth of their relationship, and sometimes I look and I think, well, you've just coexisted for 30 or 40 years or whatever it is. You've walked parallel paths, but not grown so much as just aged. And I don't want this to be in judgment of people, but it is a truth that there are people who will grow together throughout their journey, and they'll have their more difficult times, their better times and their worst times. But there is a core love between them that remains throughout. And there are people where the circumstances overtake them and they lose control, and all the good reasons that they found to be together are diminished into a corner, and all that's left is some uncomfortable circumstances that have to be managed all day, every day, and that actually prevent them from being the sweetness and light that they married each other in order to spend a lifetime in joy. And this sort of comes back in part to the extraordinary joy I experience now at this moment in being self-partnered. I'm not promoting that for everybody, but what I am saying is that I don't think it has the rap, the reputation that it's entitled to have, where you discover that you don't have to be in conflict with your partner because it's you, but you do have to understand the forces that drive you. And when you do that, it can make life very, very simple and just very enjoyable. And I still have my bad days. You know, I'm not one moment suggesting I don't, and that this now is a difficult time. I can feel it. I feel it every day. That it's a challenging time, not just Mercury in retrograde, change of seasons, COVID at a critical point where the world has to make a decision. And we in New Zealand are making a different decision from the rest of the world. The rest of the world is saying, let's get out there and party, and to hell with the consequences. We'll live with them. And New Zealand is still saying, we can get on top of this. You know, we've still only got it in mainly in the Auckland area and the surrounding areas, but we're in the South Island, you and me, and whatever the future holds, we've had a year without a single case in the South Island of New Zealand. That's extraordinary. And we're still masking up to go out and doing all those things out of respect, but not out of necessity. There may be a day when it is, and I'm not saying there won't be, but how blessed have we been to have this gentlest of experiences of what has been a horror story for the world.
For sure, for sure. So is there anything else you'd like to add today? It's been such a pleasurable, conversation to just hear. I just think that what I'm getting out of this is never give up. Never give up, no matter where you're at, no matter what you're at. Know that you said it a few times today, it's been your journey as I've had my journey, as every person has their own experiences in this lifetime. And some are great, some are not so great, some are wonderful. And, I said to my husband yesterday, I said, how is it as a human being we can have like 4 or 5 phenomenal days where you feel so high and on top of the world and getting out of bed, kicking and so excited. And then the next day you wake up and you're like, boom, feel like you've hit a brick wall. And I just realized it's part of the human experience. It's part of knowing that, you know, you've got to know when to slow down. You know, you've got to know when to take time out without feeling guilty or feeling the overwhelm that we can, and that I know I most certainly can. And it's navigating ourselves in the present moment.
And having a depth of relationship with your partner where they understand that.
Yes.
Where the daily minor issues don't dominate the larger, and the larger has to be accommodated. You know, if it's not, then you're just going through the motions.
Absolutely. And, you know, you've said some amazing, remarkable things today about relationships, about growth. And again, I can only speak from my own perspective. And in my second marriage, that's what's happened between Brent and myself, is that there's been times where he's grown, there's been times that I've grown, but there's this beautiful, deep, deep love. And a lot of people don't understand it because we used to be called Andy Cap and Flo. Do you know good old Andy Cap and Flo? I actually think you wear a little hat like Andy Cap, hey?
I've got one.
You do. Yeah. Because we just do. We have moments of just like, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't stand you right now. You're such an arsehole, you know, and then 5 minutes later, you're like, we're over it, okay? Love you so much, you know, and you got to laugh through this. You absolutely got to laugh through it, because it doesn't matter that what anybody else thinks. I'm coming to realize in life. And I think that's the gift of the authenticity of what we started out as in today's conversation, is that it actually doesn't matter. What matters is what you think of you, Stephen. Isn't that a truth in itself, would you say?
Yeah. Well, how you feel about yourself.
100%.
If at the core of your being, you're comfortable with yourself, and on a bad day, you're less comfortable, and on a better day, you're more comfortable. But it's the average. It's how it is that you live with yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's been kind, and it's been respectable, and it's, you know, I'm not at the moment, it's just not in my consciousness to have a mask around me. So often I think you and I were talking about this, you know, a few weeks ago. I'll get to a place and I'm like, oh, I've got to go back home because I forgot a mask. But I'm honoring others out there, you know, just because of where I'm at or what I'm believing in these times. We still live together. We still honor each other. We still are respectable towards one another. And for me in that, it's about being compassionate. And there's kindness in saying, to myself, like, I don't really enjoy wearing a mask, but it's okay. You know, it's 10, 15 minutes of my day, and that's okay. So any other kind words to end off for today, Stephen?
Be lucky.
Yes.
It feels very complete.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wonderful life experiences, and we'll catch up with you all soon again. Have a blessed day, everybody. Bye.